عارف ليش انت هون؟
نعم.
So I recently watched this film, Kafarnaum, and it really got to me because it depicted the struggles of this refugee child who was suing his parents for giving birth to him. Philosophers call this antinatalism, the belief that parents giving birth to a child that they know they cannot provide for is fundamentally unethical. You know, this sentiment is actually very prevalent in rural areas where women keep having children despite having no income, no opportunities, nothing. But if you look at wealthy cities like Mumbai and Bangalore, the exact opposite is happening. Birth rates are dropping significantly. So yeah, it's not just you. No one wants to have children anymore. You know, since the dawn of man, reproduction has been our most profound purpose. The one thing every species is hardwired to do. But now, all of a sudden, humans are losing interest in creating life. It's no longer a priority, and we're observing this all over the world, which actually raises some pretty massive questions. Why are more and more young people saying no to parenthood?
There's an urge. I really do want to have kids, but I don't know if I'll be able to.
What happens to a country when an entire generation decides not to reproduce? Now, you might think the answer is simple. Is the economy stupid? Nobody can afford kids anymore. But there's a lot more to it. And some of it will probably make you uncomfortable. See, you might be young now, but sometime very soon, you're gonna arrive at this crossroad to be or not to be a parent. And this is not like choosing a career or buying a house. This decision is permanent and will define the rest of your life. So I think it's important that you make this choice with your eyes wide open, with all the information, so that you don't succumb to your parents' expectations or the pressures of society. Which is why I have dug deep into this. I want to break down what the real cost, financial, emotional, opportunity cost of raising a child actually is in 2025, so that when the time comes, whatever decision you make will be an informed one and the right one. Okay, before we begin, I want to show you guys something. But for this, we need to go all the way to Japan. Not the densely populated city of Tokyo. Rather, we'll visit a small village called Ichinono. You know, there are fewer than 60 residents keeping this little village lively. But when you walk around the village, you might feel like it's a lot more populated. And that's because the residents there have put up life-size human-like puppets all over the place. There are more puppets here than people. The villagers did this to combat the loneliness they struggle to get used to. Because in the last 2 decades, Ichinono has only seen one single birth. Now let me take you to the next place, a quaint little village in Italy called Massiola. If you were to tour this village for a while, you'll come to a surprising realization that you haven't seen a single child ever since you set foot there. And that's because there aren't any. Since 2015, no child has been born here. In fact, 358 villages in Italy have reported the exact same in 2023. No births at all. Screw it, let's go back home and begin our story. What you just saw isn't an isolated phenomena. It's a growing concern. All over the world, regional extinction is being observed and ghost towns are popping up. And most of it can be attributed to the fact that fewer and fewer people are having children now. Okay, so it's clear. Fertility rates are dropping. But then, how come the population is increasing? I know it seems counterintuitive, but don't worry, there's a pretty straightforward answer. Let's go back to the mid-1900s when the average woman worldwide used to have about 5 children. This meant that a cohort of 100 women would produce 500 children. Half of the new cohort will have 250 women who will then go on to produce another 1,250 children and so on. Thanks to them, the population rose from 2.5 billion in 1950 to 6.2 billion by the year 2000. Then, around the 1970s, something shifted. And we started observing declining fertility rates in pockets across the world. But here's the thing, the population kept growing anyway. Why? Momentum. All those kids born in the 50s and 60s, they grew up, they had kids too. Even if they had fewer kids than their parents, there were just so many of them that the numbers kept climbing. But the pace at which it was increasing started to decrease. It's kind of like a freight train. Even after you stop adding coal to the engine, it takes miles to slow down. So the UN forecasts that global population will peak around 10.3 billion in the 2080s, and then it'll start to decline. That's when you'll actually see the devastating impact of the declining birth rates. Now, to understand why all of this matters, you need to know about something called the replacement level, which is exactly what it sounds like. If families, on an average, have enough children to replace the parents, the population size will remain steady, which is why the replacement level is considered 2.1 births for women. The extra 3.1 accounts for infant mortality, that's basically babies who don't survive past age 1. Now, this is a very important statistic to keep track because a population stability depends on the balance between births and deaths. And right now, fertility is dropping. But to make the issue worse, life expectancy and death prevention is getting better and better, which is a great thing, except for this context. Basically, the balance is slowly being tipped, and that leads to a cascade of problems. Think about it this way. When each generation is roughly the same size as the one before it, planning becomes easy. You know how many schools to build, how many hospitals you'll need, how big the workforce will be. It's predictable. So you just have to keep doing whatever you're doing. But when women are having fewer than 2.1 kids, the next generation shrinks and becomes a smaller cohort. Meanwhile, the older cohorts just keep living longer than ever before. The ratio of a younger workforce to an older retired crowd goes for a toss. This imbalance is measured by a metric called the Old Age Dependency Ratio, or OADR, and it's really crucial. Policymakers literally obsess over this number because it tells them where to spend the taxpayers' money. So India's OADR is at 10% right now, which means that for every 10 elderly people, there are 100 working class citizens aiding their pensions, healthcare, and other social support systems, which is good. In fact, it's ideal. But experts predict that ratio is going to get a lot worse. And when it does, everything changes. Jobs, GDP, tax rates, budget, the entire structure of your career can go for a toss. Let's look at the case of Japan. So they have an OADR of 48% and they've been struggling to deal with the crisis. The demand for pensions skyrocketed, hospitals and long-term care facilities became overwhelmed. So to accommodate the aging population, the government had to redirect funds. So money that used to go towards education and infrastructure now props up elder care. So they borrowed and borrowed until they were sitting on one of the largest national debts in the world. And to manage that, they raised taxes gradually, which made the younger working class cohort very angry. Even the ethics of voting were affected. So in most countries, the working class people's votes are more substantiated as it's their future at stake, not the elderly's, right? But in Japan, more than 40% of the electorate is over 60 years old. So a lot of the appeasement during political campaigns is directed towards them and their needs, which I'm guessing did not sit well with the younger folks who were building the country's future. Okay, I need to interrupt our story to share something exciting from the sponsors of this video, Quillbot. Their Chrome extension is an absolute game changer. If you ever find yourself rewriting the same sentence 100 times, trying to make it sound right, Quillbot can save you. It's an AI-powered tool that helps you write like a pro, no matter where you're typing, Gmail, Google, Docs, LinkedIn, wherever. Let me show you. Here's the rough email I wrote. I just highlight it, click the paraphraser, and it instantly writes the sentence in a more polished, confident tone. You can even switch between formal, simple, or creative tones depending on your requirements. Next, I run the grammar checker and every little fix pops up right there. No copying or pasting needed. And for those who often use AI tools, the humanizer feature makes sure your text sounds completely natural and original. Basically, Quillbot makes your writing smarter, faster, and effortless. You can try it free with the Chrome extension, link is below. Now back to our story. Now let me take you all the way to South Korea, a country that holds the unfortunate title of world's lowest fertility rate. 0.75 as of 2024. This means that a cohort of 100 women would produce 75 children. Half of the new cohort of 75 children that are women will then go on to produce 28 children, and so on. And this shrinking is exponential. South Korea also has mandatory military service for all men aged 18 to 28. But in the last 6 years alone, their military manpower has shrunk by 20%. Fewer births mean fewer soldiers. And the women of that age group had it even worse. They had to deal with much of the maternity wards being shut down. What's the point of having so many wards if there's no one to occupy it, right? Now, problem is, this also meant that the women in rural areas lost easy access to safe and timely deliveries. See, when so many of these services shut down, movement decreases, which then leads to bus routes drying up, which then leads to so many people leaving for bigger cities, turning that village into a desolate ghost town. Poster child for this phenomena is the city of Busan in South Korea. It has lost 6 lakh people since 1995. So, to sum it up, fewer births means fewer villages, means regional extinction. You see how one simple metric, how many children women are having, can have such consequential ripple effects. And it's not just at a regional level, we're going to be witnessing a complete demographic shift by the end of the 21st century. How? Because today, Africa makes up about 18% of the global population. But by 2100, sub-Saharan African is expected to account for nearly half of all births and around 38% of the total population. Why? Because they have a total fertility rate of 4.33 births per woman, at least as of 2023. Now, I know this is going to sound like a Marvel flick, but by as early as the 2030s, a lot of African megacities will start to pop up as they reap the benefits of their higher fertility rates. Think about it in terms of the flow of business, okay? All around the world, companies are naturally going to gravitate towards where the most number of young consumers are, which in this case is going to be nations like Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, and more. Meanwhile, East Asia and parts of Europe and North America are going to lose influence. Fewer young people means smaller workforces, weaker economies, and less geopolitical power. Okay, so I guess fertility rates isn't just a family story. It literally reshapes maps. It decides which towns get to keep schools, which cities grow, and who gets to set the global agenda. And yet, at the end of the day, fertility rates are just tracking the choices of individuals. And the consensus seems to be that no one wants to have children. Which begs the question,
do you want to have kids in the future?
Oh no, definitely not.
Just busy with my career and everything. Just haven't given that much thought yet.
Kids नहीं, kid. 1, 2, 3 नहीं चाहिए, kid, एक kid चाहिए.
You should have an ideal partner for that to raise a kid.
मतलब जब ह्यूमन किड्स का तो सोचते हैं तो 1-2 साल तक अच्छा रहते हैं, बाद में जब रोना चिल्लाना करते हैं ना, झेलना नहीं हो पाता.
Pregnancy is scary as man. I don't want to be pregnant.
I'd rather have double income, none of the responsibilities, and 4 times the cats.
I don't think so. It's just a lot of responsibility. I don't think I'm ready to take that up.
as with most things, the answer to why no one's having children anymore is multifactorial, and we're going to try and focus on the big hitters. Let me break it down. You see, for most of human history, sex and reproduction went hand in hand, at least for women. But over the last many decades, access to contraception, safe abortions, and even sex education has helped fundamentally decouple sex from reproduction. Unwanted pregnancies used to hike up fertility rates a lot, but not anymore. Now, that's a solid reason, nothing to complain about here. Now, historically, patriarchal structures have heavily influenced fertility rates. In many cultures, families wanted sons, someone to carry on the family name and someone who was more likely to earn an income. This meant that mothers often had to keep popping out children until they produced a dutiful son. Luckily, that's also not the case anymore. Or it's getting better. So another great reason is a long-term drop in domestic violence. A study by Jennifer Barber found that women in violent relationships have children at roughly twice the rate of women in healthy relationships. Amazing. Some really great reasons so far as to why the fertility rates have gone down. Then there's hypergamy. It basically refers to the tendency for people to marry someone of equal or higher social and economic status. Now, research shows that women consistently rate financial stability and ambition as their priorities while seeking a partner, whereas men often prioritize physical attractiveness and youthfulness. So the inference is that generally, a man who just finished higher education will consider marrying someone with lesser education or income. But a woman in the same position, she's likely to settle. Now, if you couple that with the fact that women surpass men in tertiary education enrollment by 30%, you can see why it's led to lesser marriages or late marriages. Both of which, by the way, can contribute to lowering fertility rates. Now, before you use the term in arguments with your peers, please bear in mind that hypergamy is a theory that's often contested in sociology. Alternative explanations like women simply having higher standards as they don't need marriage for survival is equally viable. You see, culture is a constantly evolving phenomena. It reflects the shifting desires, values, and worldviews of a society. Just look at the institution of marriage. It was once seen as a cornerstone event, something young people did at the start of adulthood. Now, it's seen as a capstone event, something that you do once all your goals have been achieved.
Explore all the things, all the fun things you should have in life. So after that, we can plan it out and execute everything.
Education, career, financial stability, travel, then maybe marriage, then maybe kids. So a lot of this shifting can also be attributed to the growing feminist movement. For the more liberal women, career ambitions now take priority over motherhood.
I don't imagine myself giving up on my ambitions or my career in the way that maybe my mom did when I was born.
Much of this is because the world treats motherhood as an obstacle to careers. A meta-analysis encompassing studies from various countries reported an average motherhood wage gap of approximately 3.7%. In the US, it's a 5 to 10% penalty per child. In Canada, the gap widens with each kid, 9% for one child, 12% for two, and 20% for three or more. Some of this is explained by maternity leaves and childcare responsibilities, but a lot of it is also simply employer bias. They often see mothers as less committed and less dependable, and often that's leveraged against them for lower pay during salary negotiations. So I guess, as a form of protest, a lot of women just decided the fertility rates. Interestingly, research shows that fathers often experience a premium upon entering parentage. Employers see them as more committed, stable, and responsible. Good for them, I guess. Not so much for single mothers, but good for them. Now, this point has nothing to do with fertility rates, but I thought it should still be brought up. Now, feminist factors don't just apply to women. The idea is to reclaim power that has been taken away from you, which also loosely translates to focusing on your individualism than the often enforced values of community. And this is a form of empowerment that we're seeing amongst both genders of the younger generation. Everyone's prioritizing their own well-being and focusing on personal experiences like traveling, hobbies, investments, and even pet parenting. I guess when you have very little, you have to band together, rely on community, but when you're rich, you can exist without any dependence. And that brings us to the biggest and most obvious factor that's lowered the damn fertility rates.
Too expensive, man, these days. Kids are very expensive. I'm not financially well to take care of anyone as of now. I can just take care of myself.
So according to the UNFPA report, 39% of people cite economic constraints as the main reason they're not having kids. It's pretty certain millennials and Gen Z are refusing to have kids because they simply cannot afford to.
इतना खर्चा है ना, पूछो मत. पहले तो स्कूल वूल आसान था, अभी इतना बुक्स ही उनके 25-30 हज़ार के हो गए, फीस उसमें 2-3 लाख हो गए. मेरी खुद की इतनी सैलरी नहीं है भाई, हो नहीं पाएगा.
So when surveyed on specific financial concerns aiding their decision, here's what they said. 32% claimed high cost of living, 22% said fear of recession, 18% said they cannot afford to buy a home, 15% said too much consumer debt, and 12% said it's because they were drowning in student loans. In fact, there are these terms that have been coined in order to label the lifestyles that these generations are falling into. Just look at these, okay? Dinks are couples with double income, no kids. There's dinkwads, which is double income, no kids with a dog. They're really embracing the humor of this collapsing economy because my favorite term is kippers, which is basically kids in parents' pockets eroding retirement savings. Alright, so shit's expensive. But the question is, how expensive? To be precise, what exactly is the cost of raising a child in India? And to break it down, let's look at the lives of two men from Mumbai. Dilip, a husband, and Dinesh, a father. Okay, so Dilip decided long ago that he was going to have a child and raise it the way he wished his parents raised him. On the other hand, Dinesh is an anti-natalist prioritizing the personal life he's building with his wife. Since the day his wife got pregnant, Dilip's wallet has had to run. First, the various tests and scans, then a series of checkups and medication, and finally, the actual delivery at a typical private hospital. That's about $1 lakh that he spent by the time the baby is a day old. Meanwhile, Dinesh, he used the same amount to fund his wife's lifelong but unfulfilled dream to pursue a career in pottery. Now, once the baby is born, that's when the actual expenses begin. Baby-proofing the house, buying a crib, an infant's wardrobe, diapers, and other essentials. That's still just day 2, by the way. And over the next 4 years, pediatric visits, vaccinations, food and formula milk, and of course, toys will eat into Dilip's wallet. All of which comes up to about 2.7 lakhs. In order to afford all this, Dilip chose to continue working the deadbeat job that he will complain about for years to come. Meanwhile, Dinesh and his wife have decorated their house with a hint of grandness and pursued their passion for philanthropy as well. The next phase of Dilip's kid's life is the most expensive one because he's headed to school for 14 years. The CBSE school fees, if you're being lenient, can add up to about 10 lakhs. Then there's all sorts of expenses like books, stationery, uniforms and shoes, school transport, utilities, extracurricular activities, and tuition classes, all of which comes up to around 18 lakhs. And the total so far, 21 lakhs. To make this happen, Dilip and his wife skipped vacations, picked up extra work, and he also had to give up on his lifelong dream to own a Mahindra Scorpio. Meanwhile, Dinesh and his wife have spent 14 years traveling all around Europe and Asia. Their bucket lists are half striked off. Now finally, the last leg of Dilip's expenses for his child will be the dramatic college years. He sends his son to a private engineering college for 4 years. That comes with other expenses like hostel accommodation, study materials, equipment, transport, and his daily expenses, all of which adds up to 18 lakhs, which makes the total 38 lakhs. Keep in mind that Dilip's son's upbringing was made possible only due to countless sacrifices on his parents' part. So yeah, that's the most conservative figure on the cost of raising a child in a tier 1 city. Just keep in mind that realistically, it often can go all the way up to 50 or even 60 lakhs. On the other side, Dinesh and his wife gathered tons of fancy anecdotes over time. They built a comfortable life without ever having to worry about what if we can't ever provide for our child. 2 families, but 2 very different lives. So now you know why no one's having children. There's one more reason, by the way, that younger generations can be seen shouting out in protest banners. That's their fears of a dystopia, or at least a non-utopia. Factors like climate change, environmental degradation, impact of a genocide on global mental health, pandemics, possibility of a nuclear war, and God knows what else have aided too many to make the decision to not have any kids. They think that it's unethical to give birth to someone without their consent unless they're confident that they can provide them with a good life. Which brings us full circle to antinatalism, a philosophy that's gaining a lot more momentum these days. So what then? How do you tackle the fertility crisis while also upholding reproduction rights and the sentiments of an evolving culture? Spoiler alert, I don't have all the answers. I'm just trying to start a discussion. What I do know is that top-down policies enforced by the government don't work. So back in 1967 Romania, under the presidency of Nicolae Ceausescu, they implemented strict policies to combat the low fertility rates and underpopulated workforce. Abortion and contraception was banned first, a celibacy tax was introduced for childless people, and regular gynecological examinations were conducted on women of childbearing age to ensure compliance. Now that's the negative reinforcement method. Further, they introduced incentives for large families like priority housing allocations and all sorts of benefits. They even tried to hype up the title of a heroine mother, bestowed upon women who gave birth to more than 5 children. Except, none of these top-down reforms penetrated into public consciousness. On the contrary, it led to severe social and health issues, including a rise in the number of orphan children. This article in The Times shows the statements of the daughter of a Romanian gynecologist who lived through the hardships. Many women would come to him with requests for abortions that the state had deemed illegal. He would ask them to procure some darker blood from a piece of beef and to stain their underwears and smear the blood between their legs. He'd ask them to tell a story. I don't know what's happening, I'm bleeding heavily. And that way, he'd sanction a necessary abortion, claiming that they've already miscarried and saved their lives. Later, he would see the human cost of the ban unfold in his clinic. Women brought in with hemorrhages and torn wombs, dying not from choice, but from a state that had taken safe care out of their hands. You see, these top-down policies had an immediate impact on improving birth rates, but then came a sharp corrective fall in fertility. That's what happens when you go against culture rather than alongside it. And that's what I'd like to put out there, that any reforms taken to solve the crisis cannot go against the very valid reasons why people are choosing not to have kids. Solve everything else, and this issue heals itself. You cannot fight culture nor solve it. You can just guide its momentum towards a desired trajectory. Okay, I think the nature of this video can be a little bit misleading. Sure, yeah, there's a global issue happening, but as far as the more individualistic argument is concerned, we seem to have made more of a convincing case that you shouldn't have kids. But you know what? This is a topic about the creation of life. They can't possibly be right or wrong, and that's why it made sense to bring back some balance into the discourse.
नेबर साहब,
अरे दिलीप जी, आप यहाँ?
कैसे हो? इतने सारे अनार, प्लान क्या है?
बस वही रोज का 2 घंटे अनार छीलूंगा, 2 घंटे न्यूज़ देखूंगा और 2 घंटे मीरा को याद करूंगा। और आपका?
आज मेरा बेटा घर आ रहा है। अमेरिका में रहकर भी उसे घर की बहुत याद आती है।
ये तो बड़ी खुशखबरी है दिलीप जी।
और दिनेश जी, आपका वो वाइनल आएगा लता मंगेशकर वाला?
अरे हाँ, सोच रहा था कि शाम को सुनूंगा।
जोर से बजाइएगा, हमें भी सुनने मिलेगा।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, फुल वॉल्यूम में बजाता हूँ।
चलो मिलते हैं।
ठीक है सर।
Before we end the video, we really need your help. We want to know what are some stories you'd like us to cover. What is something you find interesting? What is something you're possibly going through that we can dig deep into? And what are some Indian stories that we can create videos around? Secondly, we put in a lot of time and effort to bring these videos to you. We just want to create the best content, the best videos that are out there. So if you resonate with the videos we create, the effort we are putting in, please subscribe and share this video with your friends, family, and peers.